from a kind of my background in visual arts and cultural studies, so I'm not really a kind of technical person. You'll probably notice that in my observations. So that's the previous one.
This is the previous one.
Yeah. PDF, it's already open.
Oh, okay.
Great, thank you. All right. So the title page of Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan famously pictures a figure made up of smaller figures, vividly and memorably visualizing the relationship between a state and its citizenry. So two recent Olympic opening ceremonies can also be seen as attempting this, visualizing the UK in 2012 and South Korea in 2018. So I want to compare some of the technical elements so heavily present within this micro-genre of large-scale performance and consider the offering to both global and local audiences from two very image-conscious nations, one clearly looking back to the past and the other projecting a high-tech, perhaps even arguably post-human future. Great, okay. So in the book, Leviathan, Hobbes's book, he proposes that the state or commonwealth is a kind of automata, an artificial being with the sovereign at its head or as its soul, perhaps, leading the rest of the body. So for Hobbes, without the sovereign, a people degrades into a mere multitude. So he writes, a multitude of men are by one person, are made one person when they are by one man or one person represented. So at the time, this engraving, which is the kind of title page of the book, I'm presuming people have seen this image before. This was a state-of-the-art visualization of an ideological and political system, and also a mediatized, distributable printed image. So the engraving was made by Wenzel Holler from a drawing by Hobbes himself. So in the engraving, the figure of Leviathan, the sovereign, is made up of figures with their backs to the viewer. So it's as if they're a crowd almost turned towards the monarch who might be addressing them in a speech or something like that. So in Hobbes's own preliminary drawing, which is what you can see on the screen, the monarch is made up of little heads facing out. So perhaps this was toned down for publication, as it's a much more grotesque, darker, and even more dehumanizing image of the relation. Okay. So Olympic opening ceremonies might be thought of as proposing that the host nation can be known by a global audience via a set of identifiable characteristics, a bit like a person or a specific commodity. So the ceremony centralizes these characteristics in a particular place, usually a stadium, for a brief period of time so that the world can meet the host at the start of the games. So as Leviathan has its sovereign, so the ceremony usually has its director, its culture ministers, and its heads of state. So just to summarize, I'm going to say that these ceremonies both visualize the host nation in different ways. So both ceremonies, I mean, and both for national and international consumption. I'm going to suggest that the arena show, the whole show, is a kind of automata representing the chosen characteristics of the nation. And I think these arena ceremonies subsume performers, politicians, and audience into one vision of the nation, a kind of single idea of what that nation is or will be. Okay, so as well as forming the record of developing technologies, these specific ceremonies, these two ceremonies, overtly describe each nation's vision of its own version of soft power. Okay. So a bit like a theme park, the arena show is, I'm saying, an automata representing the host nation. Also like a theme park, it's a highly controlled, centralized system of representation, which must privilege certain narratives and edit others out. So they're both very theatrical and very direct in terms of communicating meaning. They are ceremonies, I think, not art. I would suggest that there's no room for interpretation, really, or multiple meanings. All right. So an Olympic team of athletes, sports people, represents the nation, but not all citizens are athletes, of course. The challenge for the ceremony often becomes how to represent the rest of the citizenry with all the weight of the world's media upon the host stadium. So Danny Boyle's ceremony, which is the London 2012 one, initially seems to embrace the democratic multitude, albeit with the celebrity ceremonial monarch literally a part of it as well. So Boyle tried to temper technology with human bodies in unsynchronized amateur performances like these on screen. So Boyle seems to have found that the best way to make a show about and for the people of Britain is to fill that show with masses of people. Danny Boyle, as the ceremony's sovereign, if we stick with that metaphor, attempted to show that the people of Britain had collectively made the show. So do people remember any of these images? So on the left of the screen, we've got these kind of largely volunteer performers who were kind of the extras in the show. And the two images on the right are athletes kind of parading around the stadium. Okay, so what might seem like a participative and inclusive work is actually, to me, more like an automated panorama made for the eye of the world's media. Boyle's ceremony is conceived as a kind of live film. He used that term himself, in which all present in the arena, cast, crew, athletes, celebrities, politicians, are kind of bit players within this big kind of film production. So many of the athletes themselves from all over the world carried cameras and phones, producing images as they walked through the stadium and were filmed and photographed themselves. So the live crowd, therefore, could see both the roving steadicams of the production team that were capturing these images that you see, and the bristling of flashes and illuminated screens of the athletes' own electronic devices. So in the ceremony, the capturing of audio visual material is also shown as testament to the importance of the event. So in 2012, the affective value of the event was kind of displayed and also proven by the participants' need to record it. All right, so onto these pixels of the title. So in the Olympic Stadium in London, each seat had a small plastic box over the occupier's shoulder, containing a set of LED lights. Together, these pixels, as they are called, turned the stadium seating into a low definition screen of 80,000 pixels, used to display sweeps of color, occasionally even images and text. The pixels also act as a sort of crowd control. So banners and even standing up were not allowed, and spectators were informed in a pre-show announcement not to hang their coats on the pixels or otherwise interfere with them to prevent the disruption of the effect. People were even asked not to wear oversized hats. So this also means that spontaneous collective acts like so-called Mexican waves were preempted and rendered obsolete actually by controlled digital waves of graphics. So with the advent of small handheld flash cameras, and now even more so with camera phones, or phones as we call them now, spectators at any event are always emitters of light, a tendency that is referenced and actually also absorbed by the pixel system, this pixel system, I mean. So I think this system at once acknowledges the diffused kind of productivity and authorship of Web 2.0 with its social media platforms, etc., and also nullifies potential interference of the audience in the performance. In this latter sense, the pixel system re-centralizes authorship of this kind of live show. So the text reads, this is for everyone, by the way, you can't get it in one frame. So the Olympic Stadium audience member is absolutely fixed. The spectators are part of an orderly array. The audience are pixels inside the stadium before they are filmed and transmitted to the pixels, the real pixels of electronic screens all over the world. So in 2012, in the 2012 stadium, we see a disciplined version of society in which citizens become pixels. Pixels also light up the faces of the spectators, making them a kind of screen themselves, like workers in front of computer screens. The public is imaged inside the stadium as producers and consumers of images. Okay, so we'll move on to Pyeongchang. So, and the drones that we use there. So Yang Jung-woong's opening ceremony of for the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in 2018 was another huge and diverse spectacle, including puppets, musical performance, projected video, and a record-breaking drone display. The ceremony and the games were also notable for the apparent cooperation of North and South Korea. So it's important for me to say at this stage that my comments are really limited to the meanings and impacts of the ceremony in the South, the Republic of Korea. Even though the Northern athletes and even some performers stood alongside those from the South, you can see one here on the left-hand side. It's not clear from my research whether North Korean audiences ever saw footage of the ceremony, which was designed in and hosted by the South. So although there was this big fanfare about the two states coming together, with a bit of hindsight, that seems a bit less convincing. Okay, so the pixel system was present here as well, with the audience again becoming part of the screen and part of an image to be broadcast. So Don Ryun Chang was chair of the Design Advisory Committee overseeing the identity of the Winter Games in 2018. He wrote that following South Korea's rapid rise in GDP, and I'm going to quote here, pride in economic achievement has been subsumed into a broader enthusiasm for social, technological, and cultural progress, with the spread of Korean electronics, music, movies, and video games. I'm going to skip ahead a bit in this quote. As a vector of progress, however, pride in socio-cultural achievement is much less tangible and much harder to compare. So he's kind of commenting that, like, you know, it's easy to demonstrate when your GDP is going up, but how do you make a kind of, I don't know, an image? How do you make a statement about your culture becoming more known? It's a bit more diffuse. So how do you visualize being the highest rated nation on Bloomberg's Innovation Index, for example? It's a bit less straightforward. Okay, so this should have been a video, but it's not going to work, but I have stills anyway. So the Pyeongchang ceremony frequently highlighted current and future technological innovation, reinforcing South Korea's established image as a place of high tech and rapid progress. However, with this comes the challenge of how to display a balance between humanistic and techno-futurist elements. So most notably, sorry, these stills are from a short sequence that was part of the ceremony, which is partly live and partly recorded. I'll explain as we go on. So most notably, 1,218 light-carrying drones created images, including the figure of a snowboarder, apparently riding in sync with human skiers and boarders also carrying lights. So this is what you can see in the top left corner. There's an image, I think a CG image of drones rising up next to the stadium. And this is the snowboarder. That was real. This was really achieved. And here are some real human snowboarders and skiers kind of underneath the drone display. And here's what they look like closer up. So this kind of the sequence ended with the Olympic rings being made in drone form. So the sequence included this sequence that I've just tried to explain, was stitched together from live footage and pre-recorded and augmented video. The drone displays themselves actually had to be done the day before. So in terms of the liveness that you're interested in, yeah, this was semi-live. Yeah. So additionally, in terms of the tech used during the ceremony and actually promoted proudly, a new 5G network was used to track athletes during events, surely with other surveillance applications only a short step away. Drones were also used to film and surveil the games. So now I'm talking about a slightly different kind of drone, and were supplied in part by the US military force in South Korea. So the Korean Peninsula is highly militarized, as I'm sure you'll all be aware, and both states still have mandatory military service in the South only for men. Some of this technology, with its thinly veiled military and security applications, may be why the ceremony was not broadcast in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north. That's my speculation. So human figures are somewhat lost in this sequence. First in a candle-waving crowd, then among the seats with their pixels again, and then in the cyborg blend of faceless athlete and drone array. And again, these are all images of extreme centralized control, be that by a choreographer or within the computer controlling the drones. So South Korea's ceremony was explicitly future orientated, whereas the UK's was explicitly nostalgic. So here we have the Olympic rings made up of light-carrying, record-breaking drones, whereas in London, the rings again were forged as a part of a kind of cosplay of the Industrial Revolution. Within the British image economy, this is something that sociologist Michael Silk has described as the commodification of pastness. So these ceremonies are both marked by their peculiar ways of illustrating the host nation coming together for the Games. In 2012, the UK was 2 years into a program of austerity, seemingly belied by the extravagance of the Games and associated regeneration in East London. Seems like a very long time ago now, but you can think back to that. In 2018, the two Korean states walked under a single flag and apparently celebrated the possibility of reconciliation, even reunification. In Boyle's ceremony, we watched the arena audience happily watching the show, with the Queen and the Prime Minister in the crowd. In Pyeongchang, we watched President Moon Jae-in, Mike Pence, and Kim Yo-jong, who's the sister of dictator Kim Jong-un, awkwardly watching the ceremony together. So these are both theatrical, fictional, or at very best temporary unities between the ruling class and everyone else. For Hobbes, there is no divide between the ruler and the ruled, ideally. In the Olympics, there is no divide between the image of the nation and the nation producing it. Okay, so just a couple of additional notes. I'm nearly finished. So Don Chang, who was the director of the Design Advisory Committee, also explained that beyond the arena, a set of special emojis were an important part of the game's design strategy. He's particularly proud of this part. And I'll quote him again. Public participation became an essential support for the success of the Olympics because it extended the scope of that participation beyond merely attending the events or watching them on TV. It allowed people to become active participants in shaping the spirit and meaning of the games. So he's claiming like quite a lot from these use of these digital images. So the games is intended as, again, to quote him, an active event rather than a passive spectacle. So the idea is that the Olympics kind of leaks out into everyday interactions, becoming even more kind of, well, potentially a kind of total work of some kind. And briefly, the Pyeongchang ceremony had within it several motifs that could be described as post-human, such as the blending and interchangeability of performers, athletes, and machines. Another motif that is cropping up all over the place, I think, in adverts as well as cinema at the moment, is that of a depopulated future. So in a lot of the ceremony, there are these characters played by child actors, and there's a bit where their futures are kind of projected and imaged with different actors and a lot of CGI. So in the top left of the screen there, you can see one of the young performers, and that performer's future is to become a kind of urban planner. So that's in there planning a city of some sort. But the city that is being planned is this kind of future version of Seoul. I don't know if people are familiar with what Seoul is actually like, but it's much more full of people than this, okay? We can't even really see many cars on the road here. This is a bit like Gwanghwamun Square, which is the sort of Trafalgar Square of Seoul, which is usually absolutely full. So that strikes me as quite strange. Okay. So is Hobbes's book the same kind of thing as a mediated Olympic mega event? No, of course it's not. But on the other hand, for Michael Silk, the sociologist, the Olympic commodity spectacle, quote, can deeply influence thought and action, acting as a tool for pacification and depoliticization. That's the end of that quote. In London, the context for such depoliticization was harsh austerity, which we're still under now. In South Korea, it is the conflicting political systems present on the peninsula and a sprint towards the Internet of Things and trends like smart cities. So trying to present those as inevitable developments that are only to be celebrated rather than to be kind of thought about. Okay, and again, Michael Silk says within the Olympics, difference exists and is often incorporated. But in the construction of unity or sameness, difference is often reduced to a stylized exotic. So in London, a kind of social cohesion was kind of assumed. And in Pyeongchang, we saw North Koreans become internet sensations, quite bizarrely, international internet sensations. So I want to end by asking, where are ordinary citizens within these images that we have on screen here? Where can we identify and see ourselves? So there's more to be said, a lot more to be said about spectacle, nationalism, technology, and totality here, but that's where I'm going to leave it for today. Thank you.
I think it was an absolutely fascinating way to wrap up our afternoon. And also, in a way, the images that one sees there are sort of an externalized sort of version of things that we've sort of seen before. The things we see sort of contained in the museum are actually sort of changed into sort of external form. A very quick observation, actually. You showed obviously the picture of "This is for everyone," which was the text going around. As you may remember, the context of that was actually Tim Berners-Lee sitting in the middle of the entire field, typing away on the computer, which was, of course, the recreation of the moment when he invented the World Wide Web. So that fits very nicely, I think, into that narrative.
He was there as a kind of artifact himself.
Exactly, exactly, yes. But I think that comparison is Seoul, and I think with upcoming Olympics, it'll be very interesting to see how they conceptualize their own national thinking and place. Thank you very much. Any other thoughts, observations before we go?
What would you call the Chinese Olympics where there was no audience? You know, it was no audience. It was sort of the COVID
Just
fatality. of
Putin and Xi.
Olympics.
Yeah, well, I suppose like for me, sorry, for me, these two go together because of the obvious expressions of soft power. I think it's a bit different in Beijing. That's, yeah, that's all I would say about that.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you all. Graham.
Well, I don't think there's much more to say or to add, or summing up remarks are needed, because we've had a remarkable series of different papers on different topics, and ideas are flowing around in the networking room over lunch times, and all sorts of things are beginning to